Hey, you guys. Welcome to the movie retrospective. Flying solo on this one, just because I had to get this recorded and edited today to get it up for the patrons. And Tom is not here because he was out running errands, so I thought, well, I better just do this one by myself so I can kind of get it done. He didn't love this movie anyway, although to be honest, I did not love this either. So here's the weird thing. I'm not entirely sure. If you guys don't know, if you're not on our Patreon or anything like that, when I put up a poll every week, and I usually give 5 movies for the patrons to vote on, like which one we're going to talk about on the movie retrospective, and I do that for the topics for the main, shows as well. Now, what I will usually do when I'm making the poll, I usually like to have a wide range of, I like to have a movie from the 70s, maybe one or two from the 80s, maybe one from the 90s, maybe a more recent one, shit like that. And I always try to spread them out across all the streaming services that we have. So I usually pick one from Shudder, one from Hulu, one from Amazon, or whatever. So this one ended up in the poll, and it's called The Thirsty Dead from 1974. And for the fucking life of me, I can't remember why I put it in the poll. What it was, because when we were watching it, and Tom was just like, this is so bad. It's how did this end up in the poll? And I was like, oh, it's because Shudder just added it. And I thought that Shudder added it because I think that Vinegar Syndrome just put out, if I'm not mistaken, a new DVD or a Blu-ray of it. And so I was like, oh, it must have been Shudder. But then I looked at Shudder and it's not there. The only place I could find it was Tubi. And I was like, I wouldn't have just picked this at random, and put it in there. So honestly, I have no idea, why it ended up in the poll. But it won, though. So I was just kind of like, okay, well, we're kind of stuck, talking about it now. And okay. Now, the thing about it, this is kind of one of those 1970s exploitation films that came out of the Philippines. And that sounds pretty cool. Exploitation cinema, you think there's going to be a lot of nudity or a lot of gore or something like that. This movie had surprisingly little of either. I mean, there is, as far as I know, there is no nudity, not even boobies, and honestly, hardly any blood at all. This really could have used some sleaze, really could have used some naked ladies, really could have used some gore. That's really this movie, like I said, it kind of sounds cool, the concept of it, and the concept of it was actually a pretty good concept, but it was just it was boring as fuck. I mean, to be honest with you, I hate to say that, but it looked pretty nice, and like I said, it kind of had an interesting story, not an original story, but it really just was, it seemed like it was 85% people just walking around in the woods. It was very much like Roger Corman's early work in that way. It's well, we only have 20 minutes of exciting footage, so we have to pad it out with people just wandering around all over the place. So that's essentially what this is. It's basically kind of scantily clad women wandering around in the jungle, and occasionally something interesting will happen. And yeah, it was just really more boring than anything else. There's just really nothing to recommend it, but since it won in the poll, and even though, like I said, I don't know how it ended up in there, so I guess we're going to talk about it. So this movie was actually, as I said, it came out in 1974. It was directed by a guy named Terry Becker, who, as far as I know, didn't direct any other films. So this was his only one, I think, as far as I could determine. Although a lot of the actors in it looked real familiar, especially there's this one guy, John Considine, and I was like, God damn it, I couldn't. I was like, I know that guy. I've seen him in another movie fairly recently, but I couldn't think what it was. I think there was a movie called The Day Time Ended or The Day Time Stopped or some shit like that I might have seen on Mystery Science Theater, or I might have watched, and I think he was in that. But I went to his IMDb page and because he does have one, he was in a shit ton of stuff. He was in a bunch of movies, he was in a bunch of TV, but it was nothing that I was all that familiar with. He was in a lot of TV in the 70s and 80s, but it wasn't anything that I would have remembered him from. So I must have seen him from, I think the movie's called The Day Time Ended or something like that. I think I remembered him from that because I was it was something that I saw recently. And there were actually a couple women in this that were soap opera actresses and stuff like that. So here, the premise of the movie is that It's set in Manila, at least the first part of it. And the whole thing is that, well, women are being kidnapped off the streets of Manila and taken God knows where. You know what I mean? Most people, and they kind of like, build it up at the beginning where, oh, they're being kidnapped and like sold into white slavery or sold into prostitution or whatever the hell. Interestingly, too, I'm not sure about the Blu-ray release, but as far as I know, like I saw like some screenshots of like the old VHS cover. And the VHS cover has like a tagline on it that says "A Surgical Nightmare," and I'm actually not. I don't know what the fuck that has. There is no surgical nothing like in the movie, so I don't know like why that's even on there. Like whoever came up with that tagline just like didn't even watch the movie clearly, so I just thought I would mention that. So we start at the beginning with this woman named Claire, who I think is again one of those soap opera actresses that I was talking about. Her name is Judith Mcconnell, the actor. And she looks a little bit, she kind of reminded me, she doesn't really look like her, but I like her whole like kind of gestalt or her vibe or whatever was giving me a very Ginger from Gilligan's Island kind of thing. So she's dancing in a cage in a nightclub in Manila. And even though it's ostensibly a strip club, she's just wearing like a sparkly bikini or whatever. And she just like shimmies around in this like, $5 cage that's like made of plastic or whatever, and everybody's hooting and hollering, but I'm like, she's not even naked. I don't know why everybody's getting so excited, but whatever. So she's actually not the main character, although I kind of wish she would have been, because I think the best thing about the movie is just how bizarre like all of her reactions are to everything that happened in this movie, which I'll get into in a little bit. Now, who ends up being the actual main character of this is a woman named Laura, and it's interesting because I don't think they mentioned this in the movie, but I was like, the outfit she was wearing, I'm like, she looks like an air hostess or whatever, like a stewardess, as they would have called it back then. And but I don't think they mentioned that in the movie. But actually, when I looked up and I was researching about the movie, that's what she's supposed to be. So I was like, okay, well, I guess they did the costuming good on that. So she has like this hair that really needs some deep conditioning. She really desperately needs some VO5 on that, but you know what I mean. I'm not gonna get too wrapped up in that. So there's a scene of her, and she has this boyfriend, Francisco, who he wants to marry her, I guess, and she doesn't really want to get married, and it's supposed to be like all, because she's just about to get kidnapped, spoiler alert, so it's supposed to be all poignant and everything like that. So, I mean, it's not, but, So, yeah, so they kind of, like, leave, and she's kind of like, oh, I can't get married or whatever, and then he's wearing, like, this really, really loud, like, checked coat. So of course I had to make some some comments about that, but she goes behind this door into wherever, and she immediately gets kidnapped by these dudes who they just look like monks, really. They look like they have they're just these brown robes that look kind of like brand new, and so they kind of snatch her and take her away. So as they take her away, they end up in the jungle someplace, and she meets up with Claire, who's also been kidnapped. And then there's this other woman named Bonnie, who's like an Asian woman. And then there's another blonde chick who's younger. I think she's supposed to be a teenager, but I think she looks like she's in her 20s, but she looks like a little bit younger than the other two. So what ends up happening, they're kind of like, okay, well, we're being sold into prostitution, they're assuming. Now, Claire, the chick that was dancing in the cage at the beginning, she is totally fine with this. And she's just kind of like, okay, awesome. She says something like, if you can make money, without even leaving your bedroom, then more is the better, you know what I mean? And I don't know, it's just very, very weird. And even when the kidnappers, one of them picks her up because she twists her ankle or some shit like that, she's just like, oh, hey, you big hunk of man, you know what I mean? And I'm just kind of like, all right, this is a very, very strange reaction that she's having. She's like, ooh, I'm gonna go be a white slave, how exciting, you know what I mean? It's so fucking crazy. And like I said, I kind of wish that she had sort of been the main character. They should have been, she's a main character, but she's not the main character, you know what I'm saying? But it's just her just bizarre reactions to everything were a highlight of the movie, pretty much the only one. So after an interminable amount of time where they're walking through the jungle, they end up at this sort of it's like a cave, it's a bunch of tunnels and stuff like that. This movie looks exactly like an episode of the original Star Trek. That's exactly what I don't know where they shot this. I don't know if it's some kind of backlot someplace. It said it was shot in the Philippines, but so I don't know where this is. It looked like the same studio sets that they would use, like if, the crew of the Enterprise were off on some planet somewhere and like all these, space hippies like lived in a series of caves. It looks exactly like that. So I'm not entirely sure where this is. There's not a great deal of information about this movie out there. So they go to this like cave, these cave people. And they all kind of look like, they're all kind of like young and hot, and they wear kind of like Logan's Run-y kind of, Logan's Run-y. They have like Logan's Run-esque kind of outfits that are kind of like silky little short skirts and everything. And what this is, like the guy that plays, that John Considine, the character he plays, is named Baru, and he has this crazy like baby blue romper type situation with all these big medallions, and one version of it has this collar that's just like all the way up here, like up to, it's astounding. I mean, it's astounding. So this society, I guess, because I was like, okay, well now they're finally here, it's like these must be the vampires, because I was assuming thirsty dead, that sounds like vampires, right? They're not exactly vampires. They do drink blood, but they're not undead, though. So the whole thing about it is that every now and then they'll kind of like go someplace and kidnap a bunch of ladies. And then the weird thing, though, is that when they drink their blood, but they don't kill them. Like they just put them all on these slabs. It's very efficient, like the system they have, kind of worked out. But they have like this big sort of courtyard, and it has like all these slabs on it. And then they lay all the victims, and then they just kind of like stab their necks, and they drain some blood out and in a bowl. And then they have these like magic leaves or something that will heal it immediately. So I'm just like, oh, okay, well, whatever. So I was just kind of like, so you're not even killing them? It's like, so they didn't really seem like much of a threat. But then you find out later on that, yeah, it might seem like, oh, we're just draining some blood out of you and then we're healing it up. So, no harm, no foul. But it turns out that after they do that to the victims for a little bit, like, so they age really quickly, the victims, and then they like kind of throw them in this oubliette type or like a little cell, and they're all these like crazy old ladies with like crazy gray hair everywhere, and they'll say something like, oh yeah, that one, she's 28, she was here for 5 years. So it's like supposedly ages you really quickly. But all of the people in the Logan's Run outfits are, like I said, they're not exactly vampires because they're not undead, like they didn't come back from the dead, but they are immortal, or they're really, really long lived. So that's kind of why, kidnap these people and bring them there and drink their blood, and that makes them immortal and they don't get sick, and there's all this other kind of stuff. So they had this new batch of ladies there, and like I said, Claire, the chick from the beginning, the ginger woman, she's just sitting there going kind of like, hey, I got a nice bed and they're giving us food. It's like, whatever. And she's just totally fine with it, even though they totally got kidnapped. But I was like, okay, well, way to look on the bright side, I guess. She's just like, and she kind of gets mad, like when they try to escape. It's like, what? No, I'm having a good time. It's like, it's crazy. So yeah, so it turns out though that the woman that needs conditioner, Laura, the stewardess, she looks like some woman that Baru, the guy with the crazy baby blue big collar, that he painted a long time ago. Like he had a vision of her. So she's kind of like the chosen one type person. It's like, oh, we've been waiting for you. You're going to be like our newest addition, because they're very like elitist. You know what I mean? They're kind of like, well, everything, we only worship beauty. And so that's why they let like the victims that they drain the blood out of, they're just kind of like, oh, well, they're old bats now. They don't kill them, but they kind of just throw them in a thing like they're a bunch of like animals or whatever, because they're not pretty anymore. But apparently every now and then, like, they'll allow somebody to join their exalted ranks or whatever. So because Baru had a vision of this woman that he painted, that she's supposedly, destined to come there and be part of it. But Laura is like not having it. She's like, bro, I mean, one, you guys kidnapped me. Two, like, I'm here with these other 3 women who are now my friends because, we bonded over this whole being kidnapped situation. And she's like, I'm not letting you guys just drain all of their blood, so, and make them age prematurely and die, just so I can live forever and hang out with you knobs, because what the fuck. And it's funny because they all seem like really like, he's like, well, why wouldn't you want to do that? You know what I mean? Like, it seems like his mind is blown by the fact that she wouldn't want to do it. She's like, but they aren't your friends, like, you just met them. She's like, dude, I mean, we've been kidnapped together, we've been in the same cell, blah blah blah. She's like, I'm not gonna fuck them over. So it comes to a point where, you know, she's trying to escape. Like I said, Claire's like, I mean, we have to. And she's like, yes, Claire, we have to escape, okay? I know you like this whole kidnapping and being a white slave situation and having your blood drained and all this other kind of stuff, but it's not good, and probably we should go back to our regular lives. So they do try to escape. Like, one of the older ladies, whose name is, well, she's not older, but she looks older. She's only 28, they said. Her name is Eva, and she, like, takes pity on them, and she kind of helps them escape. And I mean, the escape is, like, super easy. And, I mean, the guys do come after them when they figure out that they've gotten out. But, you know, then it turns out that Baru kind of flips and he's fallen in love with Laura, blah, blah, blah. And so he actually kind of helps them, knowing that as soon as he goes outside of the bounds of whatever this, it's essentially like a Shangri-La type story. Like, as soon as he goes outside of the bounds of that, he's going to age really quickly and die. So he actually sacrifices himself to, like, to help them escape. And they get back to civilization, except for Claire, who actually ends up, before they even get out of the cave system, she ends up, like, falling in a pit and dying. So, you know, but she didn't want to leave anyway. So I guess that was a win-win for everybody, because she didn't leave. She ended up in the rat pit with all the other skeletons and shit like that. So as I mentioned, this movie, I don't really remember. Maybe it was on Shudder for like a week or two and then it disappeared. I do know that Vinegar Syndrome put out, I think, a Blu-ray of it recently. I don't know if it's just on its own or if it's like a double feature, because I have seen it like as a double feature with some other vampire movie. But like I said, don't go into this thinking it's a vampire movie, because it's not really. These people at the Shangri-La place are not vampires in the sense, they're vampires in the sense that they drink blood and that makes them live longer, or it makes them immortal, you know, for all intents and purposes. But they're not undead and they don't have like magical powers really. They're just kind of like living out in these caves, like at this little, you know, in this little place. And so the thing about it too is that when I say something like, and I've seen some other kind of like exploitation films that came out from this era, like from the Philippines, and usually the appeal of watching them is they're real sleazy, or, you know, they're very gory, like there's a lot of like fucked up gore, or, you know, a lot of nudity or whatever. And this one doesn't have any of that. Like, seriously, the only time you see blood is one time they cut one of their necks and like a little trickle comes out and they put it in a bowl. And then there's like one very brief scene toward the end when there's like a kind of a big melee with the older ladies that are in the cell. You know, they kind of like tear somebody's face and it's kind of like a little bit bloody there, but that's literally it. That's all the gore there is. There is zero nudity. The women run around in, I mean, Laura, the main one, she kind of has like this hot pink like toga situation that's very like diaphanous, and the other ladies just have these kind of like brown bikini things. It's like kind of like a loincloth and just kind of like a bra thing that's like tied like across their boobs or whatever, so you don't really get to see any nudity. Like I said, I don't really care about that, but I'm just saying it's kind of like that's what people watch these movies for, and this is very, very tame. So I don't really know who I would recommend this to be honest with you, because it's like, it doesn't have like the sleaze factor that you would look for in a movie like this. You know, if you wanted to follow the story, that would be fine, but the story's not really all that original and it's not really all that compelling. You know, other than a couple of funny things that happen. I forgot to mention too, like as far as funny things, is that this society, whatever you want to call them, like all these people that live in the caves, they worship this god, I guess, who is like a severed head, but he's inside like a big block of like red. It looks like Giallo, to be honest with you. It looks like a square, big cube of Giallo mold, and there's like a head in there, and it talks sometimes. Like they can ask it questions, like they're like, oh, whatever it's called, and it talks and opens its eyes and whatnot. So I forgot to mention that too. So that's like kind of crazy. Like I said, it's nicely shot. Like it's very colorful. Like you know, I liked that the sets and the costumes kind of very much reminded me of 60s Star Trek, which was kind of cool, but it's to be honest, I think that's also its biggest weakness, is that it's basically like a really, really boring episode of Star Trek without any of the characters that you like. You know what I mean? That's essentially what it is. I mean, I've seen episodes of Star Trek that had more gore and like more sex appeal than this. So I think that's kind of like the main thing about this movie, is that it's just really, really dull. I mean, most of it is just like walking around in the jungle, whining, and that's it. And then every now and then Claire will make like a funny comment about how she's so into like, she's very excited about her whole like career in white slavery or whatever. And that's like pretty much it. So as I said, sorry, it's just me on this one, but because I kind of wanted like some back and forth with Tom on this one, because he watched it too, but he like checked out pretty early. He's like, this is really bad. It's like, it's so boring. And I was like, yeah, this is pretty boring. Like, I was trying to like make jokes about it, like, because there is some funny shit going on in it, but overall it's just really not worth watching at all. There's just nothing really to recommend it. It's just like very, unless you want it for like to put you to sleep, because it probably would do that. But like I said, it looks like it was competently shot. It doesn't look like it was all that cheap. The acting is fine, actually. It's not really all that terrible. And I've recognized a lot of the actors in it, so it's not like a bunch of nobodies or anything like that. But there just isn't anything all that interesting about it. So, I mean, it's on Tubi for free if you want to watch it and see what I'm talking about. I'm sure you probably have better things to do with your time. Unless you're like really, really curious. But yeah, so that will do it for this movie retrospective, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.